Once again, we'd like to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 5. We'll read verses 3 through verse 11. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Tonight we want to look at the Sermon on the Mount as a life of blessedness. In these verses, Jesus uses the word blessed 9 times. And each time he makes a pronouncement of blessing. But it's more than that. He also declares a fact. Blessed are. Blessed are. So it's not just a pronouncement of blessing, but a statement of fact concerning a blessed people. Now the word blessed here in the Greek is makarios, and it is translated happy it's in John 13. We go there, John 13, verse 17. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. It's not just if you know these things, but you have to do them as well. Happy are ye. And again, that's the same word translated blessedness. In Acts chapter 26, in verse 2, I think myself happy, King Agrippa. And again, that is makarios, same word translated blessed. In 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 Peter chapter 3, and we'll read verse 14. And if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, or blessed. Again, same word. Over in chapter 4 and verse 14, if ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. So 9 times he uses this word blessed, and it is the Greek word that is translated happy in other places. So in these verses that we just referred to, you get some idea where true happiness is found. And the Sermon on the Mount is, Jesus gives a description. He gives a description of a life lived under the reign of Jesus Christ on this earth. He is describing a life lived in active submission to God. And he is describing a life lived in dependence upon God. So you have a life lived under the reign of Christ, a life lived in submission to God, a life lived in dependence upon God. And such is a life that brings happiness. Happiness is found in the Sermon on the Mount life. Happiness is found in the life that Jesus is describing in the Sermon on the Mount. So let's consider the happiness that is presented here. Again, each of these verses begins with blessed are. Blessed are. Present tense. Ongoing. So it's not he's not talking about a happiness that is temporary. He's not talking about an occasional happiness. That's not what he's talking about. But he's talking about an abiding state. Blessed are. Happy are. Again, he's talking about a state of being. Now, the word blessed, as used in the Sermon on the Mount, is not referring to the blessings of salvation, but it is referring to a joy, a peace, an assurance living the blessings of salvation. It is living the abundant life that we read of in John 10, verse 10. And in that life, there is a joy. And it's an abiding joy. It's not occasional. And there is a peace, and there is an assurance. So this blessedness is a result of living life in the reality of the blessings of salvation. The word blessed, as used in the Sermon on the Mount, has reference to a state of mind, an inner condition, an inward joy, an inward pleasure, an inward satisfaction, an inward delight. It is not artificially or self-produced. It is something that God does for us. Blessed are. God does this for us as a result of. The word blessed, has used in the Sermon on the Mount, has reference to a state of true well-being. It is knowing that all is well. When you live life under the reign of Christ, and you live life in submission to Christ, and you live life depending upon Him, then you know. You have an assurance. An assurance comes over you. No matter what else is happening, all is well. All is well. And that's this blessedness that he's talking about. The word blessed, as used in the Sermon on the Mount, has reference to a joy that is independent of the changes and circumstances of life. Almost everyone, their joy is completely dependent upon circumstances, completely dependent upon how they feel. But this is a joy that is independent of the changes and circumstances of life. So it is no ordinary joy. It is no ordinary happiness. This is something that's extraordinary. It is a blessedness that can be had in the midst of calamities. Notice over in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3. Verses 17 and 18. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vine, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. None of these are good circumstances. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet. So you have an although, and then what follows although And then you have yet. In spite of. I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. So this is a happiness, this is a joy that can be had in the midst of calamities. Because the object of the happiness is not the fig tree, it's not the fruit in the vine, it's not the olive, it's not in the fields. That's not the object. And therefore it's not dependent upon these things. The object of this happiness is God. And He doesn't change, regardless of circumstances. So what he's talking about here in the Sermon on the Mount is a blessedness, a happiness that can be had in the midst of calamities, in the midst of adverse circumstances. And all that is dependent upon the object of our happiness. What is it that makes us happy? What is the main object of our happiness? It is a blessedness that can be had in the midst of sorrows. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 10, "As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing." So its sorrow doesn't disturb this happiness, because once again, the object of the happiness. It is a blessedness that can be had in the midst of trials. Notice in the book of James, chapter 1. James chapter 1, verse 2. "My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into divers temptations." Knowing this, that is, you have to have a special knowledge to be able to be happy in temptations. You have to have a knowledge. It has to be a spiritual knowledge. In 1 Peter 1, verse 6. 1 Peter 1, verse 6. "Wherein ye greatly rejoice." Talking about the blessings that was previously mentioned. "Though now," there it is again, though. "Ye greatly rejoice, though now, presently, for a season." For a season. Everything's a season. "If need be." If need be. That's a necessity. "If need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations." Many times there's a God needs be for difficulties. But even in that, ye greatly rejoice. So this is a happiness that can be had, can be experienced, even in the midst of trials. Can be had in the midst of persecution. Notice in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 34. "For ye had compassion of me in my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods." The spoiling of your goods. That is, they lost their possessions. And it says they took it joyfully. "Knowing in yourselves," there it is again. You have to know something. "Knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and an enduring substance." He took joyfully. And it was a result of knowing spiritual truth. This word blessed, the word blessed is used in the Sermon on the Mount, is a state and is a condition that will take one through pain and sorrow and loss and grief and tears and fears. He'll take them through that. So this is not an occasional joy. It's not an occasional happiness that Jesus is talking about. The word blessed is used in the Sermon on the Mount is a spiritual joy, a spiritual happiness with spiritual roots. If your roots are only in the temporal, then you can only be happy when things in the temporal are going well. If that's where your roots run, therein lies the problem. That's where people's roots run. And this is a spiritual joy with spiritual roots. A blessedness of divine origin. It's called in Nehemiah 12, verses 42 and 43, the joy of the Lord. And we read in Nehemiah 8 and verse 10 that the joy of the Lord is our strength. So this blessedness, this happiness, this joy is a source of strength. And it is a joy that is abundant. It's an abundant joy. We read that in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 2. It is a joy that is exceeding. We read that in Psalm 21:6 and Psalm 68:3. And it is a joy that's unspeakable. 1 Peter 1 verse 8. That is, it can't truly be described. It's the unsaved individual knows nothing of this joy. They don't even think it's possible. So from all this, it is apparent that man has a false perception of happiness. Most, and it's true of God's people as well, most equate happiness with feeling good. Would we rather feel good or bad? Well, we'd rather feel good. Most equate it with circumstances to our liking. Which do you prefer? Circumstances to your liking or circumstances that you don't like? Well, we all like circumstances to our liking. That's what we prefer. They equate happiness with personal preferences and conditions being met. And they equate happiness with the fulfillment of self and with the desires of self being met. And they equate it with the comfort of self. And they equate it with the acquiring of certain things. If I could only get such and such a job, I'd be happy. Yeah, for about 2 days. And then somebody would do something, you wouldn't be happy anymore. Or if I could, whatever, move to a certain place, or if I could do this or I could do that, I'd be happy. Well, not for long. That's an occasional happiness. They equate happiness with being accepted, being recognized. They equate happiness with personal attainments. If I could just reach this goal, I would be happy. Momentarily. Momentarily. But it wouldn't be lasting. So all of this paints a picture of an artificially produced happiness. And that's what the world is all about. An artificially produced happiness. That's what it's all about. But what Jesus is preaching and what Jesus is presenting in the Sermon on the Mount is none of these things. It's not a happiness that's found in any of these things that we just mentioned. You see, man's perception of happiness, if you really break it down, has its basis and is rooted in self, in selfishness. That's the basis of his perception of happiness. But what Jesus is speaking of is counter to man's reason. Again, if you go back to Matthew, blessed are the poor. There's not a period there, by the way. It's blessed are the poor in spirit. But that's not how man thinks. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. That's not how man thinks. So what Jesus is presenting is counter to man's reasoning. The whole life that Jesus is presenting in the Sermon on the Mount is counter to man's reasoning. And it is countercultural. It goes against culture. And it's also counter-religion. It goes against religion as well. It's counter everything. So it's no ordinary happiness that Jesus is talking about. Again, blessed are. Blessed are. He's speaking of a blessedness, of a happiness that is a way of life. Again, this is not an occasional or temporary happiness. This is a way of life. This happiness is a way of life. So this is the happiness that Jesus is speaking about. And as we've said many times, we'll look now at happiness is a result. It is a result. Because of man's false perception of happiness and his erroneous beliefs on where happiness is found, his pursuit is all wrong. Man's pursuit is all wrong. Because he thinks that happiness consists of feeling good, he pursues that which makes him feel good. That's very dangerous, by the way, when you enter in the depravity of man. Because man equates happiness with circumstances to his liking, he is in search for perfect circumstances. There is no such thing in this life. But he's in search for that perfect circumstances because he believes he can be happy there. Because man equates happiness with personal desires being filled, he seeks and chases after that which fulfills his desires. Again, very dangerous when you enter into the equation the depravity of man. He seeks to fulfill his desires. Why did you have an affair? Well, I wanted to be happy. Seeking to fulfill his desires. Because man is in love with himself and filled with his own self-importance and his own self-value, he pursues with reckless abandon these things that will make him happy. He believes that happiness is his right. He believes that. Probably well over 90% of people believe that. That happiness is a personal right. So therefore, happiness becomes his goal. Becomes his goal. If it makes you happy, that's all that matters. That's the goal. To be happy. Often people will say, well, the main thing is that you're happy. Really? Again, someone does something sinful, well, they're happy. I'm happy for them. Really. The main thing is that you're happy. There's no such teaching in the Word of God. The main thing is that you're happy. The philosophy that happiness is the main thing can only be true if we are the main thing. And I've got news for you. We're not. We're not the main thing. The philosophy that happiness is the main thing can only be true if life is all about us. And it's not. So, contrary to popular belief, happiness is not the object. Happiness is not the goal in life. That's not the goal. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 20, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. That is the main object of life. Glorify God. That's the object of life. The object is not happiness. Happiness is not what we're to chase and run after. It's not what we're to seek. It's not what we're to strive for. We are to strive for glorifying God. And I believe the result of that will be this blessedness that Jesus talks about. Paul told Timothy, 1 Timothy 6, verse 11, follow after. That is, pursue it. Nowhere in this verse is happiness mentioned, but he says, follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. It's all spiritual. You pursue the spiritual. That's the object. That's the pursuit of a child of God's life. Happiness is not the object of pursuit. It is the result of a life lived with the right object, which is God, which is to glorify God. So, the blessedness that Jesus speaks of here in Matthew 5, verses 3 and 11 through 11, he presents as a result. He doesn't present it as an object of pursuit. He presents it as a result of. Notice, he says, blessed are the. Verse 4, blessed are they. Verse 5, blessed are the. Verse 6, blessed are they. Verse 7, blessed are the. Verse 8, blessed are the. You get what I'm saying here. So, blessed are the, blessed are they. He mentions 8 specifics. Blessed are the, blessed are they. There are 8 specific characteristics of the recipients of this blessedness. Verse 11 is an expansion of verse 10. He says, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you. That's an expansion of what he said in verse 10. So these characteristics bring happiness. So do we pursue the happiness, or do we pursue the characteristics that bring the happiness? Blessed are the poor in spirit, The blessedness is not the object to be sought. The poor in spirit is what we're to seek, is what we are to pursue. And it goes on. Blessed are they that mourn, blessed are the meek, etc. These characteristics, you'll notice as you read this, these are not commands. Jesus doesn't say, be poor in spirit. Should we be poor in spirit? Well, yes. But that's not how he presents it here. It's not presented as a command. It's a statement of fact. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. And then these characteristics, again, they're not commands, but they're basically portals into abiding blessedness. It's what gives us entrance into these blessings or this happiness. And these characteristics are followed by promises. And where do the promises find their basis? Well, it finds its basis in the characteristics. Notice, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs, the poor in spirit. And then you have the promise. So the promise is to those who have these characteristics. The blessedness is not the main thing here. The characteristics are the main things. And the result of these characteristics and the result of living the life that Jesus is describing is happiness. Not an occasional fleeting happiness, but a happiness that is beyond description and is in spite of whatever's going on. It's a way of life. And such should mark the child of God. So what Jesus states in verses 3 through 11, he's not presenting it as a formula. He's bringing forth a description of his people, a description of those who live what Jesus is about to present in the Sermon on the Mount. It is a description with the result being blessedness. So this happiness, this blessedness, is a result of a way of life. A way of life. It is a way of life that is described throughout the Scriptures. And I believe Jesus is describing it in the Sermon on the Mount. It is a way of life that sees the Lord in life. Sees the Lord in life. Notice in Psalm 16. Psalm 16, verses 8 and 9. I have set the Lord always before me. Keeps him visible. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore, the therefore goes back to two statements. I have set the Lord always before me, and he's at my right hand. He's right there. I see him. I feel him. Therefore, my heart is glad. Therefore, my heart is glad. And my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope. There is a happiness that is the result of living life, seeing God. Seeing God. If all you can see is the happenings of life, that's all you can see, you're going to be miserable. There's not much good. You're going to be miserable. You have to see something else. It is a way of life that recognizes and acknowledges God in life. Notice in Psalm 144. Psalm 144, verse 15. Happy is that people that is in such case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord. They live life recognizing God as Lord. They live life recognizing and acknowledging God. That results in joy. That results in happiness. It is a way of life connected with wisdom. Wisdom, again, is if you do what God says, you live life the way God tells you to live it, that's pretty wise. Wisdom is thinking like Christ. Wisdom is Christ-likeness. Notice in Proverbs 3, verse 13, happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. Verse 18, she, wisdom, is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. Happiness is a result. It is a result of seeing the Lord. It is a result of recognizing and acknowledging the Lord. It is a result of exercising wisdom in life, not getting caught up in human reasoning, but following the reasoning of the Lord. It is a way of life that trusts the Lord. Notice in Proverbs 16. Proverbs 16, verse 20. He that handleth a matter wisely shall find good, and whoso trusteth in the Lord, happy is he. Happy is he. Again, it's present tense. There's a happiness that results in just trusting the Lord. Worry never makes you happy. That's never made anyone happy. Trusting the Lord. It's a way of life that reverences God. Notice in Proverbs 28, verse 14. Happy is the man that feareth always, but he that hardeneth his heart shall fall into mischief. Happy is the one who fears God, who reverences the Lord, who has a respect for God. It's a way of life that's obedient to God. Proverbs 29, verse 18. Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Happy is he. Jesus says the same thing in John 13, 17, and in John 15, verses 10 and 11. Happiness is a result of obedience. Disobedience to God will not bring a lasting happiness. It is a life walking by faith. Romans 15:13. Joy and peace in believing. There's joy, there's peace in believing God. There's a way of life that endures and perseveres. It doesn't get stuck. Doesn't get stuck in adverse circumstances. Notice in James chapter 5. James 5. Verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. There's happiness in being able to endure, being able to press through the trials of life. This happiness is a way of life that is not patterned after the ungodly. Notice in Psalm 1. Psalm 1. Verse 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. It is also a life that's saturated with the Word of God. We see that in verse 2. Happiness is a result. It's a result. It is a life of fellowship with God. In closing, notice in 1 John chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. That which ye have seen and heard declare we unto you, that ye also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son Jesus Christ. And these things write we unto you, that your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. Happiness is a result. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is presenting. He begins the sermon, blessed are. And He's presenting a life throughout the whole sermon. A life that will bring true blessedness. A life that will bring true happiness. A life that will result in happiness, in satisfaction, and it will be a way of life. It is a life to be lived, not to be happy. That's not why we're to live this life that is described. We do not live this life to be happy, but we live this life because it glorifies God. And that's the object. Don't get the object wrong in your life. The object is God. The goal is God. And if we keep that right, keep the right object, we can have a blessed life. Don't serve God because it makes you happy. It ought to make us happy to serve God, but that's not the reason we're to serve God. We're to serve God because it glorifies Him. That's our object. And I believe as we progress through the Sermon on the Mount, you will see that is the object of the Sermon on the Mount. It's a life that glorifies the Lord. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us.